really think about it, Star Wars and Harry Potter are the same exact story. They're both about an orphan boy who is sent to live with his uncle until a bearded stranger comes to teach him about this mysterious magic. Then that orphan boy trains under a wrinkly old wizard to fight an evil lord with a flashy stick. But in all seriousness, when I saw the newest Star Wars movie, The Rise of Skywalker, I couldn't help but feel a great disturbance in the Force. And I couldn't help but feel a big problem that nobody is really talking about when it comes to the future of Star Wars and Disney. And it's a problem that we can only really begin to understand when we compare it to how Warner Brothers developed and marketed another one of the world's most beloved franchises, Harry Potter. So on this episode of Admazing, we're going to discuss the surprising differences and similarities between Star Wars and Harry Potter. And in doing so, hopefully you'll learn a thing or two when it comes to becoming a better storyteller, no matter who you are or what you do. Alright, so there's so much to compare here, but let's focus on the films themselves and average out the ratings so it's as apples to apples as possible. This means just the main 9 Star Wars films versus the 8 main Harry Potter films, no spin-offs, no theme parks, no merchandise, which I know is huge for Star Wars, and no books, which was obviously huge for Harry Potter. I know it's not perfect, but it's a starting point, so bear with me here. So here are the Rotten Tomato ratings, both the critic and audience scores for each Star Wars movie. When we crunch the numbers, we see that on average, each Star Wars movie has a critic rating of 78% and an audience rating of 76%. And how did Harry Potter do? Well, here are the Rotten Tomato ratings for each of those films. Harry Potter actually surpassed Star Wars in both categories, with a higher average critic score of 85% and a higher average audience score of 82% per movie. Of course, Star Wars did make more money per film. When I crunch the sales numbers and adjust it for inflation, we see that Star Wars made about $1.6 billion per film. But as Mark Hamill pointed out, just because a movie makes more money doesn't mean it's good.
Because The Force Awakens made a lot of money, it's not ergo, it's good.
And if Disney continues making lower quality films, they'll only turn off their fan base and decrease sales in the long run. So they're really intertwined. Alright, so knowing that, how did Harry Potter become more well received than Star Wars? Well, to answer that question, we have to make it much more personal. We have to talk about J.K. Rowling versus George Lucas. On one hand, we have J.K. Rowling, who said that she intended Harry Potter to be a 7-part series from the beginning.
There will be 7, and I've just finished number 2, that will be published next summer. It's called Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and Harry finds out that he has a certain power that sets him apart from other wizards.
In fact, listen to the way she describes how she already knew the last part of the 7th book and how it would end, while she was still writing the 1st book.
I always knew, and this is from really early on, that I was working towards the point where Hagrid carried Harry alive but supposedly dead out of the forest, always. I knew we were always working towards a final battle at Hogwarts.
J.K. did so much planning that she not only thought out the story and the arc of those 7 books, but she wrote out details for every character's backstory, what house they were in, who their parents were. Even if those details never really made it into the story, it was important that she was all-knowing.
So this is the name of everyone in Harry's year, and all these little symbols mean what house they're in, how magical they are, what their parentage is, because I needed this later for the Death Eaters and so on.
In other words, J.K. began with the end in mind, which is why the end of Harry Potter is so damn satisfying. Now, compare that with George Lucas, who created Star Wars. Like J.K. Rowling, he actually wrote the entire Star Wars saga, even though he started with Episode 4 in 1977.
It was one script. It started with Darth Vader coming in the front door. It ended with Darth Vader throwing the Emperor down the tube. When I started writing, it got too big. I didn't have the money. I would never get a studio to do it. So I just took the first third and decided I'd make that into a movie, and I would come back to the other 2 parts later.
So just like J.K. Rowling, George was beginning with the end in mind. He knew that Darth Vader would reveal himself as Luke's father. He knew that Vader would throw the Emperor down the tube. I mean, he didn't make up these big plot twists after he finished each movie. He planned ahead, and just like J.K. Rowling, he wrote the backstories of each character so he would know how they would fit seamlessly together.
If you start in Episode 4, you still have to write the backstory, the exposition in order to know where you're going. You do a little profile on each of the characters, who they are, where they came from, what their feelings are about things.
And when it came time to make the prequels, George just took those backstories that he had written in 1977 and turned them into episodes 1, 2, and 3. So I get it, while the prequels may have been imperfect, they still had some rhyme and reason to them. And yes, we can talk about how George changed some of these backstories in real time. Look no further than the fact that episode 2 was originally called Jar Jar's Great Adventure and then got altered to Attack of the Clones due to fan backlash about Jar Jar in episode 1. But still, I think the prequels fit well and really aged well because, like J.K. Rowling, George put pen to paper long before they brought cameras to set. But here's where the similarities between J.K. Rowling and George Lucas end. Because while Warner Brothers embraced J.K. to help guide the Harry Potter movies, Disney didn't exactly do the same with George. So in this final section, let's talk about Warner Brothers versus Disney. And before we do, it would mean a lot if you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell if you haven't done so already, so you won't miss future episodes like this one. So when Warner Brothers turned those Harry Potter books into scripts and then turned them into movies, they heavily involved J.K. Rowling to make sure they got the details right.
In terms of your involvement, you were around a lot at the beginning and early on and very, very involved.
I wanted the Great Hall to look right. I wanted Diagon Alley to look right. You know, there were details that I saw so clearly in my mind. I knew I could help. I knew I genuinely could help.
But when Disney acquired Lucasfilms and Star Wars, they didn't exactly give George the same treatment as Warner Brothers gave J.K. Rowling.
They weren't that keen to have me involved anyway, but at the same time I said, I'm not going to, if I get in there, I'm just going to cause trouble because they're not going to do what I want them to do. So, and I don't have the control to do that anymore, and all I would do is muck everything up.
Now, I get it. George made the decision to sell it to Disney, so you may say he made a decision to let go. But even so, when big companies acquire smaller companies, they usually want the CEO of that smaller company to stay on and help with the transition. It's just good business and common sense. But no, Disney was like, George, it's nice that you've thought about these stories and these characters for over 40 years, but we don't really need you. And we're going to produce these movies in a much faster timeline than you ever did. So Disney set out to make episodes 7, 8, and 9 in a 4-year span. 2 whole years less than it took George to make the original trilogy, which took 6 years, and the prequels, which also took 6 years. And this aggressive timeline made it so they couldn't really have a new director, like J.J. Abrams, oversee the trilogy from start to finish, because it was just physically impossible.
Doing all 3 was an impossibility. I was trying to get The Force Awakens on its feet, and the idea of breaking the story for episode 8 and 9, writing them or overseeing them while we were shooting 7 was just a physical impossibility.
So they brought in Rian Johnson, who didn't just ignore George, he ignored Mark Hamill, who had been living and breathing Luke Skywalker for over 40 years.
When I read 8, I told Ryan, I fundamentally disagree with virtually everything you've decided about my character. I almost had to think of Luke as another character. Maybe he's Jake Skywalker. He's not my Luke Skywalker, but I had to do what Ryan wanted me to do because it serves the story well. But listen, I still haven't accepted it completely.
Now that seriously breaks my heart. Luke Skywalker saying he felt more like Jake Skywalker than Luke Skywalker is just a tragedy. And Mark was saying this throughout the entire marketing and press tour over and over again, which was a really bad look for Disney. And you know, this problem only became more apparent when JJ came back to lead episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. The switch from JJ to Ryan back to JJ made watching this new trilogy look like watching divorced parents fight over the custody of a child. And you can clearly see that JJ and Ryan gave each other the metaphorical middle fingers back and forth throughout the movies. And again, fast forward to this timestamp here if you don't want the spoilers, because we're going to get into some details here. But basically, if you break down the most important pillars of this new trilogy, there's no rhyme or reason. So in episode 7, JJ put a lot of importance on the mystery of Rey's parents. Then in episode 8, Ryan told us that they were nobodies. But then in episode 9, JJ said, oh wait, actually Rey's parents are somebodies because she's a granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine. Same thing with Snoke. In episode 7, JJ tells us that he matters, he's the big baddie, then Ryan kills him off, and then JJ said, no wait, actually Snoke did matter because he was made by Emperor Palpatine. And perhaps the most frustrating of all, in episode 7, JJ set up Rey, Finn, and Poe as a new trio of heroes. But in episode 8, Ryan introduced a 4th character named Rose Tico, and in episode 9, JJ basically sidelined Rose for the entire movie. Anyways, I could go on and on. The back and forth of this Star Wars trilogy would have been like J.K. Rowling writing the first few Harry Potter books, then bringing in Dr. Seuss and George R.R. Martin to switch off writing the remaining books in the series. Maybe they would have killed Voldemort earlier. Maybe they would have cast off Hermione. Or maybe they would have told us that Harry Potter's parents actually don't matter, only to tell us that they do matter, and oh, they're the children of Voldemort, making Harry the grandson of one of the world's most evil wizards. And all the while, you would have had Daniel Radcliffe parading around during the press and marketing tours saying that he didn't really feel like Harry Potter because he didn't agree with the direction of the films. He actually felt more like Jake Potter. Can you imagine how embarrassing that would have been? Well, you don't really have to imagine, because that's basically how the new Star Wars went. And I know what you're thinking. John, this isn't a fair comparison. J.K. Rowling had years to write her 7 books before Warner Brothers turned them into scripts which became the movies. But that's exactly the point. I'm not saying that Disney needed detailed scripts for the entire trilogy. All I'm saying is that they should have put pen to paper on and agreed on the biggest plot twist before they brought cameras to set. In fact, I wish Disney just treated this franchise, Star Wars, like they did another one of their franchises, Avatar. Because in the 10 years since the first Avatar film premiered, James Cameron, the creator of Avatar, has been working on writing Avatar 2, 3, 4, and so on.
Avatar 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, seriously. Seriously,
really?
they're all written, and we've done the capture.
Have you done Avatar 4 as well?
We're working on it, yeah.
So like Harry Potter, James Cameron has been taking time to write the end of those stories before he begins filming. And I bet those Avatar series will have a much better reception than the mess that was this new Star Wars trilogy. So Disney, I guess all I'm asking is that if you're going to reboot a beloved franchise, please remember the wise words of Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Patience. Use the Force. Think.
Have patience to pace out the production of these films. Think about the storylines ahead of time and lean on people who are strong with the Force, like George, who has been living with these characters in his mind longer than we've been watching them on our screens. But for now, as we always do on this show, if I had to give Disney a rating on a scale of atrocious to amazing for how they handled and marketed the new Star Wars, I'd have to say that for all the reasons we discussed, I have no choice but to give them a rating of atrocious. Whoa, we're not done yet. If you like this video, I think you'll love this episode that YouTube helped me pick out just for you. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss another episode. I'll see you next week.